Good evening. You guys excited to hear about vampires? Because I am very excited to talk about them. There's two things in life that I'm passionate about. It's vampires and Lolita fashion. So yeah, let's get started. I'm just going to say, I put probably too much effort into this because I love researching things. So yeah, get ready. There will be a test at the end. No, there won't. So who am I? My name's Carolyn. I'm a fashion designer. My day job, actually, I just started working in the jewelry industry, which is really cool. And I'm a vampire enthusiast, I would say. I wasted my college electives on fashion history and Victorian literature. This is true. My minor was in fashion history. And I know for one of my electives, I had to take a writing class, and they were like, take business writing. And I was like, no, I'm taking Victorian fiction, and you can't stop me. I consider myself an adult goth kid. And have I been accused of being a vampire in my senior year of college? I don't know. Maybe. I won't tell. So vampires have been around in history for so long, but we're really just going to talk about the 19th century because vampires before that is like a whole other topic, like the origin of vampires. They've been a folklore monster for a long time, and they've existed in lots of different cultures. And so we're going to kind of skip over that, and we're going to talk about vampires when they really entered pop culture. So I have a ton of information about this. Like, I literally have notes. So prior to the 19th century, in the early 1700s, there was a thing called the vampire craze, which was it was almost sort of like the witch trials. Like, people were being accused of being vampires, and bodies were being exhumed, and like it was like a whole thing. And they were, like I said, at the time considered to be like a monster. But then when you get into like the late 1700s and early 1800s, people started actually writing stories about them and poems, and they became a topic for popular media. One example, in 1813, Lord Byron, which if you don't know who Lord Byron is, he's like one of the most famous Gothic / romantic writers of all time. He wrote a poem called The Giaour, which is not a vampire poem, but it has a section that talks about vampires and it references them. And then in 1819, a story, I don't think it's not a full novel, it's a short story called The Vampire by John Polidori was published. And originally, when it was published, it was actually credited to Lord Byron. I'm not sure why, but he did not write it. It was written by John William Polidori, who was a friend of Byron's. And it centers around a main character who's a vampire named Lord Ruthven, who is like 100% based off of Lord Byron. It's not subtle. That's like it's very much like, get a load of this guy. Like, they just turn him into a character because they're just like, Lord Byron's basically a vampire. And this is really important because the vampire, it was really like the first vampire genre story. Before that, they were like mentioned here and there, but that was like the first, like what we would consider like the vampire genre. And it was also the first portrayal of a vampire as like a fancy aristocrat, which I think nowadays is like one of the primary associations with the vampires. Before that, they were just like monsters. But now, I mean, partly because of things like Dracula as well, when we think of vampires, we think of someone who is very sophisticated and rich and debonair. And that is, a lot of that is because of this story. And also, it's worth mentioning, I just learned about this very recently. The same year, in 1819, a story called The Black Vampire was published, and it's by Uriah Derrick Darcy. And it is literally, it's the first story about a Black vampire, which is super cool. I had never heard of this before. And the story is about a former enslaved person who was killed and comes back as a vampire to seek revenge, which is really, really cool. There's a Wikipedia article about it. The synopsis is like really wild. I didn't fully understand it, but yeah, definitely look into that. It's called The Black Vampire. It's super interesting. Um, and then in the mid 1800s, we have Varney the Vampire, which was a penny dreadful, it was a genre of horror novels that were serialized, and so they were just published in like individual chapters, and part of this is just because of like the advancements in printing technology, so they could just print these chapters as they went on and not like have to bind it all into a book, and so you could just buy them on the street. And so yeah, Varney the Vampire was serialized from 1845 to 1847, and it was written by James Malcolm Rymer and Thomas Peckett Prest. And at the time, writers were actually paid by, I think it was how many lines they wrote. So Varney the Vampire is incredibly long. It was later published as a whole book, and it's like insane. That's also why like Charles Dickens books are like very long. Like a lot of books at the time were just like incredibly long because they got paid for the more that they wrote. And then we have Carmilla, which is a pretty well-known vampire novella published in 1872. It's by Sheridan Le Fanu. It's a really great book. I read it a few years ago. I highly recommend it if you like vampire stories or just like Victorian literature in general. It's really, really good. And it centers around a female vampire named Carmilla who preys on female victims. So it's like the first real instance of a lesbian vampire. They don't like use that term, but that's what the story is. It's really, really good. And then we have Dracula, published in 1897, written by Bram Stoker. Bram Stoker and Sheridan Le Fanu, they actually worked together as writers. I believe Le Fanu was an editor. So yeah, and I mean, Dracula is like the definitive vampire novel. And I think the reason why it became so iconic, like it's a really good book. But I think one of the reasons why it was so successful is because Bram Stoker had 100 years worth of vampire content to like go off of. So he was able to like take all of these like tropes and just put it all into one book, because the sort of like characteristics of vampires, they sort of vary between stories. Varney the Vampire was the first book to really include things like fangs or hypnosis. And Dracula has all of that. So it really just like condensed all of the tropes into like what we now associate with vampires. And I think that's really important and worth mentioning. And so vampire like literature was super popular at the time. The Victorians loved to read about scandal and like taboo subjects, and so vampires like really went along with that because they represented like all of these concepts. And it depends on which book you're reading, but they could represent things like hedonism and sexuality. Vampires are just like an inherently very sexual sort of monster, even if it's not explicit. Especially homosexuality, like I said, with Carmilla, or using Dracula as an example, like Dracula being able to like have power over Jonathan Harker, even though that's not explicitly sexual. There is, some implications there. They represented physical and moral decay. They literally die when they're exposed to sunlight. It's pretty literal. In some cases, they could represent foreigners and immigration, because vampires at the time were associated with like Eastern Europe and places like Turkey, like Ottoman Empire area. And Victorian society was actually quite diverse due to colonialism. And so there was definitely this fear of like people like not being able to integrate themselves into society. And like when you're thinking about vampires, it's like, oh, they look like people, but they're not, and they're here. So yeah, not a fan of that, but that is definitely like an interpretation. They also represented the animal nature of humans. Vampires can shapeshift, typically into bats and wolves. And then also they definitely represented fears about tuberculosis and blood diseases. Again, that's, you know, pretty literal. And obviously tuberculosis was a pretty big issue at the time. And if you're ever like reading or watching anything relating to the Victorian era, and they refer to consumption is tuberculosis. It's just like a much more romantic sounding name. So we're going to talk a bit about Victorian fashion. Victorian fashion is like quite a dense subject, so I'm not going to go super in depth. I do actually have another presentation I've done before that's like the specific influences on Lolita fashion. But so the Victorian era was from 1837 to 1901. And so it's a long time. And so when you say like Victorian fashion, that means like a lot of things. The styles vary so much during the era. And in Victorian society, obviously death was like a big part of it. And they had their whole like mourning rituals and fashion. You come across anything about Victorian anxieties about folk customs? Oh, I actually don't know anything about that. I feel like, yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I do know that in like Victorian London, like you had neighborhoods that were for like different cultures, kind of like we still have that today. But in terms of folk customs, I'm actually not sure. That's a really good question. But yeah, like death in Victorian culture, dressing in black in mourning when someone died, that's something that had been around long before the Victorians. They did not invent that, but like, boy, did they make a lot of rules, and they were just hardcore about it. I don't even fully understand the rules for mourning myself, because it's very complicated, and it has to do with how close you were with the deceased, whether or not you were a blood relative or if you were married. And then also like being a man or a woman. It was usually the rules were stricter for women, because we can't have nice things, I guess. I know that if a woman's husband died, she would have to be in mourning for like a good like 2 years, just wearing all black all the time. And I'll get back to that in the next slide. But it's quite complicated. And Gothic fiction was a super popular literary genre with the Victorians, and I have to believe that influenced their fashion in some way, because everything influences fashion. And Victorian clothing was, I mean, it depends on your wealth, but pretty ornamental and pretty elaborate because there were huge advancements in manufacturing technology at the time, so they could produce things faster. The sewing machine was invented in the 1840s. So they could produce clothing much faster with like more intricate details. And it was cheaper to make clothing so people could stay on top of trends. Yeah, like I said, the styles like really changed pretty dramatically, pretty much like decade to decade. But you can kind of split up the era into 3 sections: the Romantic period, the Crinoline period, and the Bustle period. And the Romantic period like predates the Victorian era. It's like, depending on who you ask, like roughly like 1820 to 1850. And then the Crinoline period is like 1850s, 1860s, and then Bustle period is 70s, 80s, 90s. And the woman in the picture, she's clearly wearing a costume, but yeah, I think it's really adorable. So here's some examples of mourning outfits. So the one on the left, I always had a hard time believing this was a morning gown just because like there's so much like shoulder showing. Um, but yeah, this is like gorgeous. This is a great example of crinoline gown. So crinoline is what we would now refer to as like a hoop skirt or a cage skirt. And they came about in the late 1840s or late 1850s, and they were super lightweight, and you could just make them as big as you wanted. So you could have these giant skirts. Um, and the fabric is it's moire. And when you're in mourning, there are certain fabrics you are allowed to wear and certain ones that you can't. The big one that you are supposed to wear is crepe, which crepe has a sort of a rough texture, and it's not shiny at all. Has almost like a pebbly texture. Moire is kind of similar, has a ribbed texture to it, and you can see on the dress there's all of these lines. That's a characteristic of moire. It almost looks like it's water damaged, but it's not. The production process for it is they literally have two pieces of the fabric. It has this ribbed texture. They put them together and put it through rollers, and then the fabric rubbing up against each other causes this pattern. I just think it's really beautiful. You don't really see it much anymore, mostly just for upholstery or drapes. We don't really make clothing out of it anymore. But the neckline of this dress has jet beads in it, and if you were in mourning, you were only allowed to wear jet jewelry. And jet is a solid black stone. It's really pretty. It's really shiny. It's actually related to coal, but yeah, that was like the only kind of jewelry that you were allowed to wear. And then the dress on the right is an 1870s mourning dress. It's interesting because these dresses are only like about a decade apart, and they look pretty dramatically different, but you can kind of see how one evolved into the other. You have in the 1860s, as they went on, they started adding more and more volume to the back of the dresses. And eventually, by the time you got to the 1870s, you were just sweeping up all of the fabric into the back into a bustle. And this is a waterfall bustle. So you can see it just sort of cascades down and falls into like a train. So yeah, these are just two examples of mourning fashion, and you can definitely see where Lolita kind of took some of these characteristics, like obviously like the huge skirt, this whole silhouette really. And then with this one, you just have like all of the bows, and there's a lot of trim, and there's lace, and yeah, and I mean, as you guys know, like a lot of Lolita dresses have like bustle detailing on the back. So yeah. Here's two more examples of Victorian fashion. The one on the left, believe it or not, this is for sale on Etsy right now from an antique clothing dealer. So if anyone wants to buy it for me, it's $4,000, and I'll give you my address. I'm obsessed. It looks like a moitié dress. If you just cut it off in the middle, like, it's beautiful. I think the waist is like 20 inches though. But yeah, you can definitely see like where Lolita like really took a lot. There's these sleeve flounces. You have the gathered skirt. It's like beautiful black and blue colorway. The only thing that isn't really Lolita is like the neckline. But yes, this is also a dress from the crinoline era. You can see not as dramatic as the other one, but you can see it's got the large bell-shaped skirt. There's a lot of emphasis on the waist. Waistlines in the 1850s were a little bit lower than the 1860s. But yeah, and then the dress on the right, when I found this picture, it said it was a half mourning gown. I'm not 100% sure if that's correct, but either way, half mourning was what you could do once you were finished with your full mourning period. So let's say it's like a year, you could go into half mourning, which means you are allowed to wear some colors. So you could wear gray, you could wear like dark muted colors. Yes, purples were okay for mourning. That was definitely one of the more popular colors, and it's because purple was like associated with the church. So the reason why I'm not sure about this dress is it seems a little bit bright. Usually it would be more of a grayish purple or a mauve or something like that. But I do think it's interesting. There are these sashes down the front, and I can't tell if they're black or navy, but that was part of mourning fashion. Usually more for men, but if someone in your family died, you would wear like a black armband. So I don't know if maybe that's a reference to that or if it's just purely decorative. But yeah, this is an 1880s dress, so it's a little hard to see, but she definitely has a bustle in the back. Um, and this is actually like what's considered natural form, even though she's like wearing a corset and a bustle and all sorts of stuff. And it's because if you looked at her from the front, her silhouette would look fairly natural as opposed to the one on the left. I think that's kind of silly, but yeah, that's what they called it at the time. And then I wanted to include some men's fashion as well. Men's fashion really didn't change that much during the era, at least not as much as women's. We have the man on the left is wearing a frock coat. You can tell this is a daytime outfit because his coat and his pants don't match. That was considered fine for daytime. Yeah, and a frock coat was just like this sort of mid-length coat worn open in the front with a vest underneath. You could have ones for daytime, and then you could have formal ones as well. And then the man on the left is wearing an evening suit. It's kind of hard to tell, but I think it has a cutaway shape to it. And the reason why I included both of these is like these two guys look like vampires. I think it's partly just because they're wearing black. But I mean, because vampires were so iconic in the 1800s, they're wearing 1800s clothing. They didn't call it that at the time. It was contemporary clothing, but nowadays, like with the exception of some modern vampire movies and stuff, like a lot of times, like stereotypically, you think of a vampire and he's wearing, Victorian looking clothing. And then here's some pictures of women in bat costumes from the era. I don't know much about these pictures, but I do think that they're great. And they're clearly costumes for like fancy dress parties, which they were really into. And yeah, they loved bats. And Beau Brummel, go heck yourself. Yeah, everyone I know has very strong opinions about Beau Brummel. So now we're going to jump ahead to goth fashion. Now, if you're here watching this, you probably are a goth or you know someone who is. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. But goth fashion is rooted in the goth music subculture, which evolved from punk music. The single Bela Lugosi's Dead was released in 1979. It's by Bauhaus, and it's considered the first goth record. If you've never listened to that song, go look it up. It's a song about vampires. Yeah, it's, not subtle. The Damned. This gentleman on the left is Dave Vanian. He is the frontman for the band The Damned. They were like one of the first punk bands, really, and then they evolved into goth rock. And they were like a major influence on the goth look. Like other goth bands, like, dressed in black and wore makeup and stuff, but like Dave Vanian specifically was like, I am a vampire. Like he claimed to like sleep in a coffin and stuff, which is like probably not true, but yeah, he's pretty eccentric, and he still looks like a vampire. He doesn't have like the cool hair anymore, but he definitely like still looks like a vampire. And yeah, I mean, goth fashion, it's influenced by characters from gothic literature and clothing from the Victorian era, just sort of picking and choosing various things that people liked and turning that into goth fashion. Like I said, if you're here, you probably are a goth. And then Lolita fashion. Again, I'm not gonna go too into this, but yeah, Lolita fashion became popular in the 90s, and you can trace it all the way back to Victorian revival fashion in the 70s and 80s. It was not just in Japan, in the West in general. There was a Victorian revival in the 70s. The brand Gunny Sacks is the best example of that. If you've never heard of them, look them up. They make beautiful Victorian and Edwardian style dresses. Every once in a while, if you're really into vintage shopping, you'll come across one. They're so beautiful. It's like my dream to own one someday. And yeah, Lolita fashion heavily features Victorian influences, which I went over before, between like the petticoats or hoop skirts, and then the puffy sleeves and like lots of ribbon and pleats and all sorts of like interesting design details. And there's the entire Gothic substyle of Lolita. Arguably like half of it is. Yeah, I don't know if I need to explain this any further. Um, yeah, like I said, if you're here, I don't think I need to explain this. I love my 70s Victorian style blouse and boots. Yeah, there's so much cool stuff from that time. I have a pair of Victorian looking boots. And I'm actually not sure what era they're from, but they're super Victorian looking. So everything I just went over, how did we get here? Well, in the 1800s, vampires became cool and sexy, and people loved them and wanted to be like them, or at least read about them. And then around the same time, the Victorians, they were pretty morbid and pretty extra, but like, boy, did they go off with the aesthetic. And then jump all the way ahead to the 80s. Now we're legally allowed to dress like vampires and sing songs about them because Bauhaus said so. And then now Gothic Lolita, aristocrat, vampire romance. It's all Lord Byron's fault. All of this. It's why we're all here today. It's because of him. Always blame Byron. Yes. So there's a pretty decent amount of prints in Lolita that are vampire themed. So I just included a few of them. I included the ones that I thought were really interesting. The one on the far left is Vampire Garden Carmilla. And then the next one is Vampire Lament. It's kind of interesting. It's like from that era when like Alice and the Pirates is doing those like kind of like really washed out prints. But I actually really like that one. It kind of looks like faded wallpaper. It's got like little coffins on it. And then after that is Violet Fane. I think the whole name of the print is Van Helsing's Vampire Hunter Academy. And if you don't know who Van Helsing is, he's a character in Dracula and he's a vampire hunter. He's the most famous vampire hunter. And then lastly, we have Vampire Requiem, which is like probably the most popular vampire print from Alice and the Pirates. Alice and the Pirates, I think, has done the most vampire themed pieces. And then here's just some close-up pictures of some of the prints. The one on the left is Vampire Garden Carmilla. You can see it's got bats, it's got tombstones, it's got a castle, roses. The only thing it's missing is lesbians. And the one on the right, we got coffins, we got gates, we got a carriage, we got bats. So yeah, it's all the vampire stuff rolled into one because they knew that we would buy it. And then here are some other Lolita pieces that are not specifically vampire. Well, there's some of them are sort of vampire themed. It's not as explicitly. And the first one is Vampire Doll from Alice and the Pirates, which I think is really beautiful. It's really simple. It's got this very cool bat wing collar. on it. It definitely has like a pretty Victorian look with like the way that the skirt is flounced. And then it's got a corset. I'm not sure if it's built in or if it goes on top. And now, obviously, like in the Victorian era, you would not have worn your corset outside of your clothing. That's like going outside with your bra over your clothing. It's just not done. But that's okay because we're not in the Victorian era. And then we've got the Atelier Boz Roland coat, which like everyone knows, and which definitely it's a little bit 18th century inspired with like the way that the buttons are, but it also generally like it's got definitely the silhouette of a frock coat, especially with like the notched collar. And the Roland coat, like the way that it's constructed is literally like it looks like a vest underneath, but it's all just connected. But it's cool because it mimics the look of a frock coat, which would have been worn open with a vest underneath. So I think that's really cool, the way that it's made. And then we've got the moitié bat cloak, and so it's got like a bat wing collar on it. And then lastly, Angelic Pretty has this purse called Angelic Bat. They have like a whole look, dress and everything. But yeah, we love a coffin purse, like the little wings on it. It's super cute. And then how could we not talk about this? So Victorian Maiden sold a coffin at one point. I don't know why, other than it was like just a publicity stunt or marketing stunt. There's a listing for it on Lolita. Um, I doubt anyone bought it. It was like $1,000. We need to revive the term Swiss waist. Yes, actually, you're right. The dress on here definitely, yeah, it's not a corset because I mean it like ends under the bust. It's what we would call a corset today, just not like historically. Um, but yes, dream burial. I know. Bury me in my Victorian Maiden brand coffin. Yeah, as far as I know, it was just used for like photo shoots. Um, how did it end up that it was Victorian Maiden, not Moitié? That is such a good question because I don't really consider Victorian Maiden to be as gothic. Like they have gothic stuff, but like not as hardcore as Moitié. They're just like so committed to it. Yeah, I don't know what year this coffin is from, but yeah, there is a Lolita listing for it. And like I said, it's like $1,000. Wonder what it was made out of. It's hard to tell. But yeah, I love that this exists. VM used to be hella gothic. Oh, that's interesting. I'm gonna have to look back at some of their really old stuff because I am not like they're not really a brand that I ever got into because I can't fit into anything they own. I just have a hat from them and that's it. They had a crowdfunding thing a few years ago where they put it up for sale. Yeah, I think I remember hearing about that. But like, did anyone buy one? That's what I want to know. Um, and I wonder if does it say Victorian Maiden anywhere on it? Yeah, yeah, it's an insane thing to sell. And then Moite was like, "Oh, now we can't do it." I don't know. They could line it in blue and make a ton of money. Like I would, if given the choice, I would rather own it with that like royal blue lining. How much is shipping? Yeah, good question. Just imagining it arriving in a big crate. Some other examples of vampires in Lolita culture, though, I mean, this is really more like Visual K, but Visual K and Lolita overlap so much. Firstly, we've got Bada no Conre, which was the Visual K band Malice Miser made a vampire film. is basically Dracula. It's a silent film, which is really cool. Is it good? I don't know, but it's like an extended music video. Yeah, it makes no damn sense. Yeah, I've watched it. I watched it a really long time ago. It's on YouTube. So I'll drop the link to it in the Discord after this. Um, but it's over an hour long. It's like a full movie. It's not just like 30 minutes or anything. Um, but and it, like, features, like, their music and stuff, but, yeah, that's, like, such a wild thing to do to make, like, a full silent film, um, but, yeah, the plot is, like, Dracula, more or less, um Malice Muse are doing something for the aesthetic? I know. Can you believe it? And then we've got Kami Joe. He's the frontman for the VK bands Lorraine and Versailles. He also is a solo act now. I don't know if is Versailles still making music. I'm like not. I haven't kept up with them at all. I used to be super obsessed with them. But yeah, Kami Joe's like whole deal is that he's a vampire. Like he wears fangs in videos. He just released a song. I just watched the music video earlier and it's called like Vampire Rockstar or something. Like, yeah, he's not subtle about it. But that's okay. He definitely has a very like elegant, like I would say like aristocrat type style. And yeah, he's still making music, which is super cool. I think he's done some like online concerts and stuff. Um, but yeah, and if you've never like listened to Versailles or anything, definitely check them out because they are like out of all the Visual K bands, they're like the most elaborate. And I think they actually did a collaboration with it might have been Baby or Alice and the Pirates. I think they did do like a Versailles JSK. I might be wrong, but I think that they did. I'm still low key obsessed with Kami Joe too. Yeah. So fun story. I actually met them at a convention like 10 years ago. Um, they played Anime USA, I think. Yeah, Anime USA, which is a con outside of DC. And I got them to autograph my album. And Kami Joe is literally one of the most beautiful people I've ever seen in my life. So I decided to put together some outfits based off of like popular vampires. And so how could I not do Lestat from the Vampire Chronicles slash the film Interview with the Vampire? It's probably how most people know him. Um, so it was a JSK, a vest, and the bonnet. Okay, yeah, for Versailles. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. But yeah, so this outfit I put together for Lestat. I'm trying to remember the name. The coat and the pants from Alice and the Pirates are the Eleonora coat and pants. It's got like a way longer name, but I think this is super cool. I have never seen this set before. I just found it on Lolibrary. I think it's so cool. It's like the coat and the pants are from like two wildly different eras. This whole outfit is, but that's okay because I feel like that's how a vampire would dress. If you've been alive for 500 years, your like wardrobe would just be like a hot mess of all these different eras. Um, but yeah, so Alice and the Pirates, Eleonora, uh, coat and pants set, and then we've got a jabot blouse from Atelier Boz. The hat I think is from H. Naoto, but I don't remember. And oh no, I'm gonna get sued by Anne Rice now. And the shoes are from American Duchess. And then we've got Nadja, one of my favorite vampires personally, from the TV show version of What We Do in the Shadows. And she has like a very Victorian inspired look. for a lot of her outfits in the show. Like none of them are like what I would say like are historically accurate, but that's okay because that's not the point. It is a modern day show. Um, yes, it's literally my favorite TV show. I'm a couple episodes behind on the current season, but I love her so much. She's our disaster queen. Um, so yeah, I picked out a blouse from Atelier Perot and a skirt set from Atelier Boz, and got the crystal heart necklace from Pubithel, which I think they just re-released some. Boots from American Duchess, and then I don't remember where this velvet jacket is from. I forgot to write it down. I'm sorry. But yeah, she definitely wears like a lot of either black and red or like black with like jewel tones. I know in the current season, there's an episode, I won't spoil anything. There's an episode where they go out and they're in the snow and she's wearing this like incredible emerald green, like bustle coat. And it's amazing. Definitely like it's a fantastic TV show. It's on Hulu. And if you love vampires at all in any amount, you should watch it because it's wonderful. Yeah. And next, of course, I had to include something cute. I love Monster High. I think the dolls are really adorable. I own a couple of them. So I did Draculaura. It's mostly AP. The dress is the Milky Way JSK, and then the wrist cuffs and the bag are from their Angelic Bat design. And so the wrist cuffs have like little bats on them. And I love this purse. I had no idea that this existed. It's their lyrical bunny purse, but like she's got a little bat cape, and how cute is that? And the blouse is from Wattier. It's their bat collar blouse, and then boots from Meta. I'm glad you guys like the Draculaura coord. Like I said, I wanted to include something that was like more cute and like pastel looking to like contrast. We have like gothic, and then this is more like classic looking. So I think it's like a nice combination. Yeah, so that's like pretty much all I have to talk about. I hope that made sense. My whole timeline. Does anyone have any questions or just like want to talk about vampires for the next like 15 minutes? Because I thought this was going to take longer than it did. If you guys want to find me on Instagram, my personal is serious.moonlight. Moonlight is spelled with 3 O's. And then my brand is Noble Ghost Fashion. Don't forget to vote in the coordinate contest. And if you missed the fashion walk, oh my gosh, go back and watch it. It's amazing. I thought you said fight me on. I mean, if you want to fight me, go for it. But yeah, if you missed the fashion walk, definitely go watch it. Who's your favorite vampire of all time? Oh, that's a really good question. My favorite vampire movie of all time is Only Lovers Left Alive, which is an incredible film. It's really artsy. Came out in like 2014, and it stars Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston as these like bohemian vampires. It's gorgeous. Definitely go watch it. It's super romantic. So I like both of their characters a lot. It's like very moody. But my other favorite vampires, I mean, like all of the vampires from What We Do in the Shadows, like specifically the TV show, I'm like obsessed with. And my other favorites. I mean, obviously, if you've never seen the original Dracula with Bela Lugosi, definitely watch that. Though I will say also, They did a version of Dracula in the 70s, starring Frank Langella and Laurence Olivier. That is a very underrated version of Dracula. I highly recommend it. It's really good. It's like it's the same as the Bela Lugosi version. Um, uh, which skin hats when? No, those are cursed. I won't do that. But no, the version of Dracula from the 70s is really good. The only thing about it is it feels a little dated just because Frank Langella as Dracula has like the most 70s hairstyle, which is really funny. It's not like the slick back look. Um, but yeah, that's a really good version of it. Someone said Nosferatu. Yeah, Nosferatu is interesting. I watched it for the first time when I was in college, and I was just like, "Oh, that was weird. I didn't like that." But I kind of looking back, it's like, okay, you have to think about it in the context of the time. It's like one of the first like horror movies, and so I'm sure at the time people were like very freaked out about it. Um, where does Tanz der Vampire fall? Oh my gosh, I need to watch that. I've only seen parts of it. That's a if you don't know what that is, it's a musical about vampires, and it features the song Total Eclipse of the Heart. I think that song was like written for that musical or something like that, which is like um why the music video for that song is so weird. Um yeah. Um do not watch Dracula 3000. Yeah, I have not seen that. So I don't know about that. Um, I like Peter from What We Do in the Shadows. Yeah. I just rewatched that movie and it's great. I do really like what's his name? Taika Waititi's character. I think he's very delightful in that film. Um Trying to think of some other like really good vampire films that I like. Oh, here's a good one. If you like more like dark comedies, there is a vampire film. It's a Canadian film that came out at least some like between like 10 and 15 years ago, and it's called Suck. I don't know where it's available. I know my best friend has it on DVD, and that's how I've seen it. But it's a really great film that is about a Canadian rock band that's on tour, and they are like turning into vampires. It's hilarious. It has all of these cameos from famous rock stars, like Alice Cooper is in it. Iggy Pop is in it. Like I don't know how they pulled them. Um, but that's a great movie. I need to watch it again. So if you can find that, definitely look it up. Like Spinal Tap with vampires. Yeah, a little bit, a little bit. It's more horror than Spinal Tap, but yeah, it's got a similar vibe. Um, let's see. Oh, I know I'm forgetting something that's really obvious. What is it? Another vampire film. Oh, I can't remember. Do you guys have any other vampire film recommendations? There's a K-drama called Vampire Prosecutor. Oh my gosh, that sounds really great, actually. What's the most interesting thing you've seen done with vampires as a creature? Um, hmm. I don't know. That's a really good question. Um, I like how they're portrayed in Only Lovers Left Alive because that film takes place in modern day. And so they're literally just like living their lives, but they just have to do things differently. So, for example, like Tilda Swinton's character has to fly like somewhere, like a long distance flight, but she can only do flights that are overnight. So it's just like little things like that, or like um Tom Hiddleston's character like going to the blood bank to get blood, like rather than killing people. And it's just really it has this kind of like slice of life kind of vibe to it that's really interesting. Um oh, the Vampire Hunter D movies. Oh, I haven't watched those in so long. I think I watched at least I don't know how many of them are, but I do remember watching Vampire Hunter D in high school, and I thought it was really cool. Um, I'm currently watching Castlevania. I'm like so behind on it. I think I just started like season 2, so I need to sit down and like watch all of it. Um, and I've seen a little bit of Hellsing, but that's another one that I should actually sit down and watch. Um, oh, The Lost Boys. Yeah, duh. That's a great movie. It's been a few years since I've seen that one. But yeah, definitely a great vampire film. Um, Sorry, I'm just like going back in the chat. Yeah, Castlevania, I watched it like when it first came out and then I forgot and suddenly there were 4 seasons and I was like, "Oh no, what happened?" Also, they just announced on the Switch they like released a bunch of old Castlevania games, so I'm definitely gonna buy those and watch it. Um, or and play them, I mean. Ooh, Dream Vampire Coord. There's some really cool if you go on Library and just search vampire, there's some like extremely cool dresses that aren't vampire prints. Like I think there's one's called like Vampire Princess that I thought was really neat. Um, but I mean, like I feel like my dream vampire cord would just be just like the most gothic thing ever, and it would have a velvet cape for sure. I was just thinking about how I like need more capes in my wardrobe. I only have one, and it's red, so it doesn't really work. Yeah, apparently the old Castlevania games are really hard. Um, but I want to give them a try because yeah, I never got around to playing any of them. Short capes only. Yeah, the one cape I do have is short. How do you feel about half vampire mythos? I don't know a ton about it. Um, other than like some of the movies and stuff that I've seen that have half vampires. I know Vampire Hunter D is half vampire. Um, Yeah, there's like a lot of interesting stuff surrounding vampire mythos. Like just like with vampire mythos in general, it just gets very complicated and it like depends on like what book you're reading or what movie you're watching. It's like the qualities can vary and I feel like with half vampires like that also applies. Yeah, Blade, yeah, for sure. Um Yeah, speaking of Blade, if you haven't watched What We Do in the Shadows yet, the TV show, there's an episode in the first season that involves a lot of famous actors who've all played vampires, and that's all I'm going to say. But it's very good. Um, choking length cape. Yeah, I would be afraid of it getting caught in my car door. Such a modern day problem. I want to see a vampire film that tackles that. Is them just like going places in their cape, getting caught in things. Yeah, I can talk about What We Do in the Shadows like literally all day because I think it's the best, one of the best TV shows ever. Uh, Bodylines Vampire OP. Oh my gosh, yes, that popped up when I was looking, and I was just like, I'm gonna pretend I didn't see that because it's very bad. It's very cosplay looking. Um, Wellington Paranormal. Oh, I heard about that. Yes, I will look into that based off of the cops from the movie. That's so great. Yeah, I did hear about that. Oh, I almost included this in the slideshow and I took it out, but since we have time, I think it's worth mentioning. Um, on the subject of visual K bands, Gact also claimed to be a vampire. I don't know if he still does, but like I remember like back in the 90s, like in interviews, he would claim he was like 200 years old or something. Um, and there is a movie that he made called Moonchild, and it's Gact and it's Hyde from uh, Larkin CL, and it's like a modern day vampire film, and it's like really gay, like like it's Japan, so they can't be like too blatant about it, but it's like yeah, it's pretty homoerotic. I watched it a really long time ago. I have no idea where it's available. Um, but and it's not really like gothic. It's like a modern sort of film. I don't remember a whole lot of it other than it just like didn't make a whole lot of sense, but like I don't know why I expected it to make sense. Um, but yeah, Gact had a vampire phase for sure. I don't know if he still believes that. As far as I know, he's just like a gym rat now. His Instagram is extremely weird. um, oh my gosh, yes, I've heard about the vampire cafe. I would love to do that. All the vampires gather around and do a satanic chant. How wonderful. There used to be a goth club in Baltimore that had a cocktail that was called Vampire's Kiss, I think, that was very popular. And it was just like, it was just like vodka and grenadine and soda or something, but like they were very tasty. Um, oh, the Vampire Cafe wears Atelier Boz. That's great. I wonder, does the Vampire Cafe still exist? I know like a lot of themed cafes have like gone out of business, especially with like Atelier Boz shutting down now. Like, yeah, I just wonder. I want a vampire themed cocktail. Yeah, I thought about making one. I ended up making a Corpse Reviver #2, which felt thematically appropriate. It's a great cocktail if you have the ingredients for it. The cafe is still around. Wonderful. I'm going to try to go to Japan in like 2 years. So maybe, hopefully, it'll still be there. Black Death Punch. That sounds very good. I'll look into that. Yeah, it's super sad. I don't own anything from them, and then when I heard that, I was just like, "Well, no, I'm never gonna have anything, unless I get it secondhand." But I imagine the secondhand market's gonna be pretty intense for stuff like that. Um, I want to do a vampire tea party someday. Oh my gosh, yes, I would love to like host a vampire meetup or something. Um, ooh, do you have a dream vampire home? I love the idea of living in a castle. It's like not practical at all from like a heating and cooling perspective. But yeah, I know like I know a lot of people who are into like cottage core and stuff, and like that's fine. I'll vacation in a cottage, but like I'm more into the idea of castle core. Um Vampires don't feel the cold. Yeah, no, it'll be fine. Just like a lot of space heaters, maybe. A blood drive and everyone dresses up as either vampires or victims. And we donate blood. That's so funny. I am so squeamish. I don't think I could go to that, believe it or not. The idea of donating blood freaks me out. um, but that's a really cute idea for a meetup. Everyone donates blood and then goes out for food. Renovating an abandoned old Victorian mansion. That sounds great and expensive and a really good way to get ghosts. Um, but I do love the idea of living in an old Victorian house. All right. Well, it's 10:30. Thank you guys so much for like chatting with me and entertaining me. This was fun and I'm glad you guys liked it because like I said, I love talking about vampires. Got to be one of my favorite genders. Yes, I'm trying to make castlecore a thing. I've used the tag on Instagram before, but really most of the tag is actually like Animal Crossing islands that are castle themed, which is cool. Yeah, thank you guys for watching. Oh no. Wait, what's your panel about? I'll probably watch it. All right. Thank you guys and I hope you guys have a good night.